ready to start building them, Justin?
Shout out, guys.
Not even half, and then we'll do.
Okay, so do you guys want to roll it? Like,
But just two papers so it could be more.
Yeah, tall.
He
I think the
depends
bottom
stagger
one,
them.
I think the bottom one should be short, so the other one.
short?
So I can make it flat on the
Once
bottom.
it's, once you start stacking them up, then make them like a little bit.
Okay, so for right now, you guys want to do horizontal.
Yeah, that one. For a strong base.
Horizontal base. And you guys said two, right? How wide do you want them?
Materials. I was just saying like that.
You're doing them long, we only need five.
Yeah, just one big thing. But they want a strong base, so let's just do the first base like that.
What's the base?
The base.
You guys want two, right? That's what it is, two. Trying to make sure I'm listening. Don't feel left out. Your ideas are all valid, because I'm listening to get all your feelings, considerations, and thoughts. Okay. I don't get a partner.
No.
I feel the stress.
So, is the group supporting the?
What kind of tablet is this? What kind of tablet is this?
The Galaxy, the latest one? It's not bad.
We have a very nice picture, man.
Yeah.
How much you running?
I can tell you because I got it like last year when it was released. Let's see.
How much time do I have?
I'm not sure. I don't
It has
think
like the stylus pin in the back. On the,
Which two pieces are?
so let's see.
You're about 3 minutes.
How many pillars?
But I think the first one
Yeah.
was used.
It's only, let's see.
Which ones are the card
Yeah.
stocks?
These are only $379.99.
Yeah, use the thicker paper
Isn't
for
too
the
bad.
layers.
First gift for this message.
Oh, my bad.
Yeah,
But
but
there you
it's
go.
like,
Yeah, I don't
nice,
think
man.
we should use it for.
but it's like really good memory storage.
For reinforced layers.
Yeah, nice, man.
Right now, just put thicker, like more pieces of paper.
So you want me to use it for the top layers?
Yeah.
Close to 3 minutes in.
Like that, or do you want me to do something?
You did what we did last time, just take it.
Tape them?
You know how we did it last time? Like when we take the.
It is.
We said three, right, not four?
Yeah.
Can I go home? No, I did it for you.
Well, that's cute.
One out.
I'll say put the hard stuff.
I think you should stack the cylinders and cut the cardstock and use it to reinforce.
Oh, yeah, you could cut it.
That's what this is for, right?
Yeah.
And then like to attach the cylinders, you take strips of the cardstock and put it between them.
Oh, that's
Okay, so how do I cut this?
But I don't know if that makes sense to you, right?
If you put it together,
closer.
more closer.
I'll touch
So
you.
que queden en el centro?
Porque
Yeah.
si no, así se van a caer.
Oh, that's you, sorry. I'm like, oh.
One more time.
You got a whole roll. We go through all those There was one time.
Okay, we're gonna go 5 minutes. All right, that's it. Jocelyn, let's stay right there. I wanna, let's give Jocelyn a hand. All right, so how was your team? Fabulous, yeah. Okay, how do you feel being up here?
I don't like it.
You don't like it? You know what? Nick, when you're responding to an injury, do you like it?
Well, that's it. Well, I like being able to help, but we deal with some really difficult stuff.
Right, so Jocelyn's up here, just like a real life, she likes being able to help, which is why she volunteered, but she's not really liking having to be here, right?
No.
But you wanted to volunteer.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the way it is in real life sometimes. Not everything we do, we want to be doing it at the moment, so good experience right there. How about the teams? Did you guys work together as a team, or did you form separate groups? Separate groups, okay. And we had a lot of different ideas. We had triangles over here, we had cylinders over here. I think we had maybe a kind of a tripod idea coming out of this table. Maybe, no, or just a long one cylinder?
Nah.
Okay. I'm missing two.
Now we're talking about boxes.
Boxes, okay.
Yeah, box like.
Was anybody thinking about the tripod?
I think that was one of them too.
I heard tripod is single cylinder.
Triangle, there's a triangle, no tripod.
Single cylinder going up. Okay. And Justin, did you hear a lot of?
Oh,
good
no,
ideas
I was like,
coming
that
out?
shit's structural, I think.
Okay. So this is how it happens in real life when we get involved in a situation where we're not familiar with what we're doing and there's a group around us. This is a good example of what happens in real life sometimes. You might be responding, Jocelyn might be responding to something that she knows how to do, but there's a group of people around her that aren't familiar with that process or just a little bit nervous about getting involved. And so the group will form into smaller groups and then have conversations amongst themselves and maybe offer some suggestions to Jocelyn as she's responding. So it's a good example of what happens in real life sometimes. Thank you, Jocelyn. That was good. I won't tell you all the ways that we can make things very high with paper, but there's a lot of different ways you can do it. And I saw a lot of creativity in this group, and the triangles I haven't seen before.
Really?
Yeah, that's an interesting idea.
I just heard that triangles are the strongest shape in construction.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I've never seen that one before. Thank you for showing that to me. Okay.
All right, back to Nick. So we're gonna talk about how things are organized in response to disaster. Concern, again, is all about how an entire community is more resilient by responding to disaster. And everybody has roles. In fact, one of the things you hear if you get into public safety is stay in your lane, meaning that we each have our jobs and we do our jobs. So I want to put that in perspective a little bit by talking about just what happened here, sort of being the person up front where everybody's looking at you. So I told you I'm a medical unit leader on these huge fires. And what happens when one of our people gets hurt or trapped or something, everything that isn't absolutely essential stops. And guess who's in charge all of a sudden? Me. Because I'm the guy who gets the rescue gear, I'm the guy who orders the medical resources in, I'm the guy who's on the phone ordering an air ambulance or rescue helicopter or whatever. And everybody who runs the fire, all the people in charge gather up around our communications trailer or tent or whatever it is. And I'm in there with radio operator and I'm finding out what's going on and ordering the resources we need. And all these people who used to be my bosses are now watching. And when I first started doing this, I was thinking, I'm not sure I want to do this. Because I feel like they're all going to be judging me, right? Because all of a sudden, let's say this last fire we had about 1,200 people. And now all of a sudden, I'm in charge of what those 1,200 people are going to do. But we had some emergencies on the fire where I was in charge, and all the people gathered, they're all chiefs and so forth. And I realized, not at the time, but later on, I realized they're not there to judge me. They're there to help me. And it just changed my thinking completely. And And so now I think it's great that they all gather up there. Yeah, they're my bosses, and they're the ones who can, decide my future and so forth. But when one of our own gets hurt or something and we need to respond as effectively as possible, they're not there to judge me at all. They're there because they have all kinds of expertise that they're gonna be able to help me out with. So the next time you volunteer or get called up to the front, and everybody's looking at you in an exercise like that, just try to adopt that mindset. You're here to help, not to judge. But what is people's number one fear? You know, if they ask people, what's the thing you're most afraid of? What the number one answer is?
Dying?
Public speaking, not dying. So there's some comedian who said, at a funeral, it's better to be the guy in the box than the one who has to give the eulogy. That's public speaking, that's scary.
I don't mind public speaking, I don't like being trapped.
Well, nobody likes being trapped, I think. So, we're gonna talk about the different aspects of disaster response, fire safety, medical, we'll cover those today, I think. And then light search and rescue, how CERT is organized and how that organization fits into the bigger picture of emergency response. We'll talk about disaster psychology, and CERT terrorism. So, for this unit, we're gonna talk about roles and responsibilities, who does what. So that, stay in your lane, you're gonna identify the different lanes, essentially. So the kind of hazards that we have in general, but also we'll talk specifically about this area, since you're San Jose. We'll talk about what kind of things we need to be ready for. Personal and organizational preparedness actions. So nobody's prepared to respond to the community in a disaster unless they're ready as an individual for disaster. So one of the things we want you to be ready for is to have everything you need so that you and your family, people you care about, your pets, anybody like that is taken care of, because you really can't go be there for somebody else if you're having to deal with the fact that you weren't personally prepared. And we'll talk about what CERT is all about. Key priority in lessening the impact of disasters. So disasters happen, right? We do what's called mitigation to try to prevent them, but they happen anyway. And some of them, like wildfires, are getting worse and worse every year. And then the goal of CERT and all the rest of public safety is to lessen the impact of that. We do want everybody to be as prepared as possible. So there is a very short class about personal preparedness, where we urge people to have supplies on hand, like water and food and so forth, so that when disaster hits, they're not stuck. And when communities like City of San Jose or Silicon Valley in general, or the Bay Area in general prepare, the way we prepare varies according to where we live, right? So we don't need to be particularly prepared for a hurricane here, because we don't get hurricanes. And in Florida, they don't have to be particularly prepared for earthquakes, because they don't get earthquakes. So we really think about what could happen here. So we'll talk a bit about that. And then engaging the whole community. If there's one key to resilience, it's how well connected you are to your neighbors, to the businesses, and so forth. The connected communities are resilient communities. So we're constantly trying to build up connections, because we can't do everything ourselves, and if we have those connections with other people and organizations and so forth, we can make a lot more happen. So government. Government's responsibility is to create disaster plans. You know, what are we going to do if, to think about what might happen, how are we going to respond, test those plans, and then constantly refine them. On our big wildfires and other disasters, we have this thing called a planning process, where usually every 24 hours we rewrite the plan for how we're responding, because things can change that fast. So there's a whole series of meetings that happens during the day, so that each day a new plan comes out. It's called an incident action plan. And sometimes it's the same from one day to the next, but it can change too, depending on like the fire or flood or earthquake or whatever, what it's doing. Make sure emergency responders have skills and resources. So we have all sorts of training and certifications. I have a binder of certificates that's probably an inch thick just for all the different kinds of training, and I'm not even that high up in the food chain. And resources as well. So there's a lot of things we can't do if we don't have hose. You know, we can't put out fire with water. If we don't have bulldozers, we can't stop fire by clearing lines. So managing resources is a huge, huge thing. We'll talk more about that. And then, government is responsible to provide services to protect and assist citizens. So when the government puts people into hotels or houses them after a disaster, that's not just because they're being nice. That is their responsibility. So our elected officials are absolutely part of their job and their responsibility to have good disaster response in place and to take care of people and feed them and provide them housing. It's not optional. It's part of the job.
Hey, Nick, I want to add something to you right quick. The first part where Nick was talking about refining the emergency plan as CERT responders, the process in which that takes place, that's what you guys will be doing and we as CERT members will be doing. We call it a CERT size up. During the CERT size up process, that's where you will determine whether or not you're gonna change your plans or whether or not it's gonna stay the same. So I just wanted to add that in because you guys will hear that CERT size up, and that's what it's the same thing as, okay? Thank you.
We'll cover that a few times, where periodically, in the midst of a disaster, you stop, you look around and say, is this plan working? Should my priorities be the same? Have things changed? Do I need to do something differently? And adjust. We do that all the time. Thank you. So, at most levels of government, there's something called an emergency operations plan. So you can go online and you search San Jose or Santa Clara County Emergency Operations Plan. You'll find an inch-thick book if you printed it out that talks about the plan for how we're going to respond to disasters. And it says who's responsible for what, who reports to who works for who. Describes how government is going to do those things that they're obligated to do, protecting people and property and so forth. And identifies all these different resources that we need to know where they are and how to get them in an emergency. So community leaders, so this would be like the mayor and board of supervisors and the emergency operations management staff, a couple of those folks are going to be here today. But community leaders of all sorts, and not just elected officials, but church leaders, business leaders, all the people who are in any kind of leadership position really have a responsibility to be part of this. And we try to include those people as much as possible to work together to build these plans. And that's where we identify a lot of the resources. On wildfires, for example, probably half the resources we have are private. They're private businesses, they're bulldozers, they're water tenders, they're contract firefighters. They're in the private business, and they go, they move around the country as fire season moves around from the southwest to the northwest and so forth. And then, we're shopping for a lot of stuff. Like the medical unit, every day I'm ordering all sorts of supplies from wet wipes to cold medicine to all sorts of stuff, and somebody has to go buy that from a store or order it and have it delivered. But you need to know how to do all that. And then ensuring that facility staff and customer service are prepared. So there's an organization here in Santa Clara County, and there's similar ones all over the country. They're called VOAD, Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster. And so they're called voluntary because they don't have to respond, the government has to. Government has to. Right? But Red Cross, Salvation Army, and literally hundreds of other organizations that voluntarily respond to disaster need to be coordinated. So the generic name is VOADs, and there's VOADs all over the country. Ours is called Cadre. We have our own name, which is used to be on the board of directors.
Community something disaster.
The last part is disaster response efforts. Not too important to know the activity. But Cadre exists to connect all these different groups that voluntarily respond to disaster. And so CERT often plugs in through organizations like Cadre or through government, CERT. But fundamentally, nobody has said it yet. CERT's main role is surge capacity for firefighters. There aren't enough fire engines, firefighters, and soldiers to deal with the big disaster. Our fire departments are staffed for day-to-day operations with a little bit of extra. here in California, we have a bit more extra because of wildfire, but right now, all those extra resources are out, trying to put out these enormous fires. So there aren't a bunch of people sitting around who can suddenly jump up and operate in a disaster. So CERT's role is to be that surge capacity when disaster hits, and especially cover the first few days within limits, and we'll talk about what those limits are, because there just aren't enough firefighters and police and paramedics and dispatchers. So the more everybody in the area is prepared, the better off we're all going to be, more resilient the whole community is going to be. So we do a lot of teaching and preparedness. So for the public, how many of you ever heard of Alert SCC? Anybody? Alert SCC. So one of the things I'd like you to do today, at some point, maybe at lunchtime or during a break, on your phone, search for Alert SCC, like Santa Clara County, and sign up for emergency alerts, so that you will receive a text message when there's any kind of emergency going on. We ask really everybody to do that. So the public needs to know about how to be alerted, and then radio, email, social media. These days we're using all these different ways to try to communicate alerts, warnings, and so forth. And knowing, if, especially in an earthquake, some roads and bridges will be down, knowing where you can escape is very important, so knowing your way around. Public, we urge public to take training. That's what CERT is all about. So every city in the county participates in CERT in some way, in one way or another. Practice as much as possible, build that network of resilience, give feedback. So let us know what's working, what's not, what's effective, what isn't. Report suspicious activity. We will talk, there is a terrorism module in particular where we will talk about the kinds of things that you should notice and say something about. And then volunteering. So Citizen Corps is a name for not just CERT, but the other volunteer organizations that operate in disaster. So here in Santa Clara County, we also have Medical Reserve Corps, which provides doctors, nurses, EMTs, paramedics, and so forth in the event of disaster. We have Aries Races, which is ham radio operators. Santa Clara County probably has the most advanced ham radio emergency system in the world. Other places come and use it as an example for how to train and organize their people to give us backup communications when everything else fails. Citizen Corps includes other volunteer organizations as well. So Citizen Corps councils are something the federal government likes us to have in place everywhere that brings everybody together to coordinate disaster planning. So, types of disasters. Natural disasters, technological, those are ones that Mother Nature just hands us, like when lightning strikes and sets a forest on fire, that's a natural disaster. Technological disaster. So we have technology that starts forest fires as well. Anybody think of what that would be? What technology out there has led to fire?
Power lines.
Power lines. Yep. Power lines blowing in the wind, setting trees on fire. That's a technological disaster that turns into something a lot like a natural disaster. And other technological disasters could be like a fuel spill or something that's caused by people rather than Mother Nature. And then intentional, so that would be terrorism. And there's a whole section on that as well. So the definition of a disaster is essentially that it exceeds the capacity of the local responders to deal with it. That's it. If so much is going on that there aren't enough cops, firefighters, medics, dispatchers, and so forth to deal with it, that's now a disaster. So it's overwhelming. And I don't like the fact that they say may be overwhelmed, because if it's a disaster, that's pretty much the definition, is that they are overwhelmed. And so they need help, and you're the help. And lives, health, the environment are in danger. So, what kind of disasters do we need to be ready for here in the Bay Area? Earthquakes, of course, big one. That's what we usually think of first.
What's happening now?
What's happening now?
There you go.
Luckily, it's actually been a really slow fire season right here in the Bay Area. Spring Valley has had no fires since June, knock on wood. But boy, last year we sure had some fires. No, any disaster. COVID, yeah, COVID's a bit of a disaster. Sorry?
I'd say it's a lot of
A
disaster.
lot of it disaster, yeah, more for some people than others, for sure. But it definitely has had a huge impact on the economy and our daily lives. What else?
There you go.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anderson Reservoir has been drained, but that Anderson Dam down by Morgan Hill, if that thing had broken with the reservoir full, we'd be underwater right here. Not real deep, but this would all be flooded. In fact, and I think just a couple of years ago, we had flooding in some of the manufactured home parks right over here on Oakland Road, because the creek overflowed. So yeah, flooding is absolutely a big concern around here. What goes with flooding in the mountains? Mudslides, blocking roads, carrying houses away. Absolutely. Others? So a few years ago, they played a big football game in Santa Clara at the brand new Levi Stadium, Super Bowl 50. What kind of disaster was possible with that? What do you think we really had to be prepared for? Terrorism. The security around that Super Bowl was incredible. I could only see parts of it. A lot of it is very secret. But some of the stuff I saw was pretty amazing in terms of how many eyes are out there looking and how much things like misdirection were happening that would lead terrorists to pick the wrong targets and things. I mean, aside from the stadium itself. But yeah, terrorists go for high visibility or crowded places. So Golden Gate Bridge, big terrorism target. Imagine, or the Bay Bridge. Imagine the terrorists could actually, cause that bridge to come down. They want to, one of their goals is to cause huge economic disruption. Or some of the businesses we have here are vital to the world's economy. We have Intel, which makes the chips that are in so many devices. And a lot of these other manufacturers around here, if they could disrupt those businesses, it would have a huge impact on the economy. Any disasters we haven't thought of?
How would they identify terrorists? Because a lot of people do it based on their race, which is obviously not correct.
So the question is, how to identify terrorists? Well, there is a whole section on terrorism, and we'll talk about it a bit there, but highest priority, and the thing that I think keeps a lot of people up at night is right now, I think the FBI has said number one concern is sort of the homegrown terrorists who are kind of on their own. They are Americans. They're not happy with the government. There's a lot of very anti-government people up where I just spent the last few months in southeastern Oregon and they call it North State. If you're ever up there, Siskiyou County, up there by the Oregon border, do not call it Northern California. This is Northern California. They're insulted by that, so they call it North State. A lot of, but some of the sheriffs up there were telling me that there's ranches that they won't go into. There's very anti-government people with a lot of guns, and they're not very friendly to anybody who is wearing a patch. Okay, identify susceptible locations. So I just talked about some of that. There are things like flood maps. The reason I know that we would be underwater here if Anderson had failed, they are rebuilding that dam right now, so it won't fail. Is because there's a plan. I was down at the Morgan Hill Dispatch office, and there's a bookshelf with notebooks on it, and one of those notebooks is the plan for if that dam fails, and it shows flood maps. Depending on how much water was in the reservoir, it showed, where's the water going to go? What areas are we going to have to worry about? So that's part of that planning process, identifying susceptible locations. And then, what might happen if services are disrupted. So, different roles here. So police address incidents of grave public safety. So, for example, on these wildfires, the fire department doesn't evacuate people. We recommend evacuation to the police. The police have the authority to actually do evacuation warnings or orders, and it's the police who go door to door evacuating people. Now, we'll help out if needed, but that's police responsibility. Stay in your lane, like I said before. That's their lane. Well, on the fire side, we're working on putting fire out. Firefighters suppress major fires. We're going to talk about how big a fire that you should try to put out on your own. It's not very big. EMS, emergency medical services, handling life-threatening injuries. So part of what's going on here is, in a disaster, nobody can deal with the little stuff. Nobody's writing parking tickets in a disaster. Nobody's, arresting people for minor crimes. Everybody sort of shifts their priorities to the big stuff. And lower priority needs are met in other ways. And especially for fire and EMS, that's CERT. That's what CERT does, to address those lower priorities. So there's all sorts of different building construction. Every earthquake that happens, we learn more about which buildings fall down and which don't. And the fact is that they don't really build buildings to survive earthquakes. Let me finish that thought. They build buildings so that the people inside will survive the earthquake. The building may be so damaged that it needs to be torn down. But the goal now in how they design buildings is to keep it standing up enough that nobody gets crushed inside of it and people can get out. I went to Haiti after the 1989 earthquake, that was here. The earthquake in 2010, and building construction in Haiti was unregulated, basically. They had written regulations, everybody ignored it. There's a lot of bribery, a lot of just really, really poor construction practices, including things like using sand from the beach in concrete. Well, if you get salt into concrete, it's not very strong. And so we'd see building after building after building where there wasn't a piece bigger than about that big around, just turned into gravel. Anybody happen to know how many people died in that earthquake? Was that 11 years ago in Haiti?
They were killing us.
How old were you guys 11 years ago? Probably weren't watching the news a whole lot.
I was in like no later than Thursday.
Anybody want to guess?
Wait, how, was it in the hundreds? No. Thousands?
Yeah.
1,206? No.
So it's funny, I'll ask people who were, adults and people who watch the news and so forth, and they'll say, what's it, like 10, 20,000 people? So the population of Port-au-Prince is about 8 million. Not the same as, I think that's the same as the South Bay. Is that right? Or the Bay Area? Anyway, 250,000. Oh no, the population's 4 million. One out of eight people died in that earthquake in the Port-au-Prince area. 250,000 people. And that's what lousy construction will do, sadly. So, luckily here, we shouldn't have buildings like that. But like I said, every earthquake discovers more vulnerability. So different buildings, and we'll talk about how you can, let's say if there is an earthquake or a storm with high winds or something. We've actually had tornadoes here. We had a tornado do damage to buildings in Sunnyvale a number of years ago. They're very rare, but they happen. And we'll talk to you later about how you can look at a building and decide if it's safe to go in there or not. And then we'll talk a little bit about single-family houses versus apartments and condos and so forth, and the differences there. So in homes, still have lots of houses have gas for water heaters and furnaces and stoves and so forth. Displaced water heaters are ranges, so we actually just had our water heater replaced yesterday. And it's strapped to the wall because that's required. It's been required for a while now in California because if in an earthquake, our water heater has 40 gallons of water in it. Water weighs 8 pounds per gallon. So if I do the math correctly, that's 320 pounds of water plus the weight of the tank itself. If that starts moving around in an earthquake and it comes off and the gas line breaks, now you have a gas leak, which is not good for anyone. So now water heaters have to be secured to the wall. Stoves don't have to be secured. They're not as top heavy as water heaters, but the gas lines can break there or just shifting to the earth. Damage from falling books, dishes, cabinets. So I know that I should have all of our stuff secured a lot better than we do. I used to put, we just moved a year ago, and I guess because a year and a half. 2 really busy fire seasons. I've been home a lot, so I haven't done things like put little latches on cupboards and things so that everything can't come falling out. I had a friend who, after the 1989 earthquake here, that was the last really big earthquake we had in the Bay Area, he had a lot of books. His bookshelves fell over, there were books everywhere, and he stacked books up all around the house, including on his stove. The earthquake happened right around dinner time. He forgot his stove, his electric stove, was turned on when the earthquake hit. Well, the power was out, so when he stacked the books there, no problem, right?
Power came back
Guess what
on.
happened when they turned the power back on?
Oof.
His apartment burned up. So stuff like that can happen. Electric shock or injury, so power lines come on. Power lines are something we have to deal with all the time in firefighting, because they sometimes start fires, sometimes fire will burn through them and they'll fall down. The last firefighter killed in the line of duty here in Santa Clara County, Mark McCormick with County Fire, was electrocuted. And the sad thing was, and take this as a really important lesson, Mark was warning other firefighters about the power line when he accidentally touched it. Or actually, I think he touched a fire truck that the line was in contact with. So Mark knew that that danger was there, yet he still accidentally bumped into it and it killed him. So the lesson there is, when there's risk, you even when you're telling other people about it, you got to keep your, like we call it, situational awareness of what's safe to do and what's not, because you can have, the technical term for it is brain fart, right? Just had a brain fart and accidentally touched the thing that he was warning everybody else about. That's just a reminder that it can happen to any of us, and we just need, especially when we're tired and it's an emergency and so forth, it's good to slow down, take your time, and really watch out. And we've changed, because of what happened to Mark, we've changed some of the ways we deal with down power lines to try to prevent that from happening again. So that's outdoor power lines, but inside a structure too, you can also get that. And then fire can come from wiring that isn't done right, plugging, 1,000 things into one outlet, putting power, electric, like extension cords under carpets and rugs, bad idea. Don't do that. Derek, you wanna take this for a little bit? I'll rest my voice.
Sure.
We'll take turns here. Probably speak up now and then when we go to
Okay, home and workplace preparedness. This is just going to be discussing how to make sure that you have your home prepared, fortified, as well as the workplace. What you want to do is know the local hazards in your city or in your neighborhood. For example, what if you're living somewhere close to a chemical plant or a gas plant? Would you consider that a hazard in your neighborhood, in your area? Yes. Okay. So exactly. So we want to know what that is. As Nick mentioned earlier, know the alerts. When you guys get a chance to take a break, Google it, look it up. SCC alert. Okay. Know the warning systems. I know in San Francisco, I'm up there a lot, or was up there a lot previously, and they're always running at noon, I think it's on Tuesdays. They do, anybody here ever in the city or from the city, by any chance? No, okay, no problem.
What do you mean by the city?
San Francisco. So they actually practice their alert system. They run the big horn at I think it's like noon on Tuesdays. No evacuation routes, right? Know the area that you live in. If you choose a certain route, it could be a hazard there as well, right? So know evacuation routes. Discuss it with your family, workmates, or whatever before a disaster actually hits. And have sheltering plans, right? So let's talk about kind of shelter in place real briefly. If you had to shelter in place, what would make you have to shelter in place? What type of incidents or accidents will make you? Do you guys know what shelter in place means?
Yeah, we all have to do it.
Okay, what does that mean?
You stay in a spot.
Exactly. What do you guys think would make you have to do that? Exactly. Yes, exactly. They had a shelter in place a couple of days ago. So, some things or material you might want to think about or consider adding at home will be what? If I'm sheltering in place and there's a gas leak, can it get in my house? Yes,
If there's a
no.
gas leak in your house, then probably you shouldn't go in your house.
Well, from the outside.
Oh.
From the outside. It could be a chemical. Just want to kind of get you guys' brains to thinking. Because guess what? If you didn't know this, it's something that you would have to think outside the box for, right? So let's just say it's some type of chemical release outside, and they're telling me to shelter in place. What can I do to help fortify my home?
Maybe you go inside, you close all the windows, you put towels under the doors and block it.
Voila. Having plastic is great to have at home, guys. I have a lot of it at home. And guess what? I can seal my windows. Even though the window's closed, it can still seep in slowly, right? Just things to kind of think about. Good thinking, okay? Consider important elements of disaster preparedness. Consider important elements of disaster preparedness. Meaning what? Exactly. Yourself first. Do things like make sure you have proper documents, extra documentation, medications, and I think there's an area here. Well, we will address that. Okay, it is right there. Address specific needs for yourself and people you know. If you have senior parents, grandparents, disabled family members, friends, or whatever, address the specific needs for them. So in your preparation, if someone needs a wheelchair, make sure that you have a wheelchair available, right? At all times. Protective actions, things that you can do to protect yourself. Assess the situation. Why would we need to assess the situation?
Just to make sure that you know everything will work fine.
Exactly, because things change. We're constantly doing this, not just as CERT members, but as emergency response, public workers, public safety workers. We're constantly assessing the situation because it changes. Depending on what type of incident it is, it can happen rapidly or it can happen slowly. So we're constantly assessing the situation. As we assess the situation, we'll be making decisions like whether we're gonna stay or change locations. What, if we're already sheltered in place, what is something that would make us wanna change or consider changing locations? Exactly. Where you're currently located is now becoming an immediate threat to you. Okay? Critical early decisions in disasters. That's what's gonna, when you assess it, that's what's gonna alert us to decide whether or not we're going to change locations, okay? Seek clean air and protect breathing passages. Well, thanks to COVID, we all pretty much have masks on hand and readily available now, okay? Just real quick, when there's smoke, do I want to be high or be low? Low. Good, you guys are sharp on that one. Trick question for you guys. Okay, you want to make sure that you're able to protect yourself from debris and signal if trapped. If you're trapped, how can you signal?
Yelling, trapped.
What if you've been yelling, no one hears you?
A light.
Flashlight, what's something else we can use?
A gun.
There it is. A whistle. A whistle.
Every firefighter carries one of these.
Exactly. You have to keep those guys. I'm telling you, you'll be surprised. Even camping, hiking, backpacking, all that good stuff, I always have a whistle. Guess what? The person that said yelled and screamed, that was good. I mean, yeah, you're gonna do what you're gonna do and what you need to do to be recognized. But if you're tired and you're weak, it doesn't take much to blow that whistle, okay? Want to make sure that you have the ability to remove contaminants, okay? What's that? How can I remove contaminants? What would you guys consider contaminants in a disaster? Yes, we'll go with a flood, a fire. Let's say a flood. What would be contaminants?
Sewage.
What else? You can't necessarily, it's bacteria, get out of here. You might not have this stuff to work it right there, right? Let me pull it out my pocket right now. So guys, what about our personal body fluids? Those are contaminants, right? If you don't have sewage, your toilets and stuff work in the house, don't you want to get rid of that stuff? You want to have somewhere to take it? I think there's a section here where we're covering that as well. And practice good hygiene. What is that?
Wash your hands.
Wash your hands at minimum. But it'd be great if you wash the rest of your body, right? But at minimum, make sure that you're washing your hands. You know, again, COVID is here now, so a lot of us have hand sanitizers with us now, okay? Sheltering, here we go. We just kind of discussed this, guys. Shelter in place, sealing a room. We talked about that, putting a towel under the door, possibly plastics over the room. Identify internal room. That will be a room within the residence or dwelling that you're in that can most safely secure you, okay? Depending on how long will you stay in these areas. Making sure that you have store supplies. That's when you're sheltering in place. Shelter for extended stay, the criteria is for days or up to 2 weeks. Store emergency supplies. Before we used to say 3 days or 72 hours. My personal recommendation for everybody, this is my personal recommendation. I would try to make sure they had at least a month's supply of everything. That's water, and food, those necessities. At least a month. That 3-day business, 2 weeks, the way things are going right now, it's not gonna work. And what you don't wanna do in a disaster is be that person at the gas station, be that person at the store. Look how the world responded to the loss of the threat of. You guys remember that? People get beat down over toilet paper. Yeah, and exactly, the hand sanitizer. I mean, when you could have just got a washcloth and cleaned yourself and then washed it off and reused it. But they wanted to fight over toilet paper. Guys, make sure that you have your supplies. You don't want to be caught up with crowds. In a disaster, stay away from crowds. It's no good, okay? Mass care community shelter. If you had to leave your residence and you're going to some of the communities around here are set up for that, you want to make sure that you have then at least a 72-hour kit. Why? The shelters will kind of provide some of the stuff for you, but you definitely want to be able to go in the shelter because even though you're in a shelter and your roof is provided for you, right? There's still people there, right? It's still a crowd, but more of a controlled crowd. But along with crowds come lines to wait, okay? Hurry up and wait is what we say in the military. So you want to make sure that you at least are able to go there with your 72-hour kit, okay? As I said right there, the shelters provide most of your supplies. Okay, developing a disaster plan. The way to combat a disaster, guys, is to be prepared. That's what this is all about, okay? It's best to have and not need than to need and not have, okay? Period. I've been kind of stressing this for a long time with friends and family members, and I get called all kinds of names because of the gadgets I have, Inspector Gadget, I'm paranoid about stuff. And this was only, now mind you, on up until about 2 years ago. When the pandemic hit, my phone was blowing up. And honestly, I was saying, leave me alone. You should have been listening. I've been trying to tell you, you should have been listening. Be prepared, guys. You don't tell your family, tell your friends. They might look at you and say, oh, you're young, you blah, blah, blah. Then you take it upon yourselves and start getting yourselves prepared and your families, okay, guys? Because it's super duper important. As Nick was saying earlier today, the goal, the best way to combat a disaster is to really get the entire community involved. Develop relationships with stores, businesses, and your neighbors. I'm not saying that you have to become best friends with people, but just develop those relationships so that when you need to, you can go to them, and they could possibly come to you. And that's how the community stays together. In a disaster, communities break. They fall apart. People kind of get caught up in me, I, me. But guess what? We all need each other, okay? So again, understand that what we do is to really bring the community together. So in a disaster, you guys want to have this as part of your plan. Where will you meet? If you guys are here and you have family at home, what if there's no cell service? What if you guys don't have radios? What if you guys have radios and there's no repeaters available, okay? How do you know where to meet your family? You have to discuss that early. You might have an example of how to do that is you guys can say, look, in a disaster, and I'm just using it as an example, you can pick your own place. I live over here off of Berryessa. I can say, guys, in a disaster, if we cannot, and be specific about this, if we cannot contact one another, we'll meet at Berryessa Community Center in the front parking lot by stall 3. Be specific about that. Remember, there might be other people over there, so you're gonna get there, you're gonna be yelling, and everybody else is gonna be yelling. So try to be as specific as possible. Berryessa Community Center, front parking lot, slot 3. Okay? For here, we might not have phone service locally, but guess what? You might be able to call someone out of state. So as part of your emergency plan, you guys can say, we're gonna call grandma. I'm from Tennessee, the real Tennessee, South. Can you hear my voice? We're going to call grandma in Tennessee, right? So I might not be able to call, I don't have family here, but let's just say if I did. I won't be able to call my brother here, but I could call my grandmother in Tennessee. My brother wouldn't be able to call me here, but he could call my grandmother in Tennessee. So what we would do is we would have, as our out-of-state check-in point, it will be my grandmother. So when I call my grandmother, I can leave her a message for my brother, vice versa. Now, we're both here, but my grandmother's there. But she will be like a relay point for us, okay? So an out-of-state check-in contact will be great. If you are going to have an extended stay or shelter in place or evacuate, you want to have a disaster plan for that. Yes?
What if you don't know anyone who lives out of state?
Well, this is all about creativity. You can find someone.
I mean, I have internet friends, but I don't think that counts. Maybe it does.
Well, if the internet is down, because this one right here was specifically about the telephone. So if the internet is down, you might not be able to do that. But it's all about creativity, guys. A lot of this stuff in here, you can take it and insert the things that you want. You can take and insert the things that you guys want to put in there, okay? You have to be, other thing I want to say, guys, you might want to write this down. This is an acronym called PACE, P-A-C-E. So for all of your disaster plans, you wanna have what we call a PACE plan. For example, your out-of-state check-in contact. Whatever plan you have for that, whatever plan you have to evacuate from your residence, whatever plan that you have set to meet your family somewhere, you wanna have what we call a PACE plan, P-A-C-E. Primary plan, an alternative plan, a contingency plan, and an emergency plan. Sounds like a lot, but guess what, guys? That's what being prepared is about. PACE, primary, that's the first thing that we're gonna do. Alternative, if the first one doesn't work, then we're gonna have an alternative plan, and it's gonna be here. If the alternative plan doesn't work, we have a contingency plan. This is contingent upon the first and the second one not working. Emergency plan, whoa boy, it'll work, but that's the least we wanna do, right? But if you create these series of plans, guys, it's just gonna keep you more in tune to the situation and a lot safer, okay? How will you escape your home, workplace, school, place of worship? We already kind of discussed that. So these are the places that most of the time, or that you are located. So understand that even when you're here, guys, know where your exits are, kind of know the buildings and stuff that are around you, you know, when you guys are here. What route? Again, several alternates. Sort of sounds like that PACE plan, guys, right? Will you use to evacuate your neighborhood? Do you have transportation? Okay. What is transportation?
A thing that gets you from one place to another.
Exactly. And it could be these dogs, it could be the 2 wheels, the 4 wheels, a unicycle, get from one place to the next. Flying, Colin has wings back there. And, okay, and the other thing, guys, try to practice your plan. I know it seems silly, like fire drills in school. All I know, we used to like fire drills because we got a break. But you have to practice these things, guys. Here, I'm also a ham operator with San Jose Aries and Races, and we do what we call quarterly drills, county drills. And that's where we get on the radios, we go county to county, city to city, and we pass emergency traffic. Not in emergency times, just to ensure that we're able to start working out redundancy, right? Yes, ma'am.
I feel like, instead of like only like having one plan, you should also make like alternative plans, because you don't know what's gonna happen.
Say it again?
You should like make like alternative plans, because you don't know what's gonna happen.
Yeah, that was what I was referring to with the PACE. Primary, alternative, contingency, and emergency. So yes, you are correct about that. Okay, guys, here, escape planning. Consider needs of children and individuals with disabilities. Again, if you need a wheelchair, crutches, canes, okay, any type of walking assistant, make sure that you have those things available. Enlighten, inform your family and friends of the plan, right? Make sure that everybody's on the same page with this. And again, run practice escape drills. And some of the things kind of talk about fires and escape drills. Have you guys seen those fire ladders for like 2-story buildings? 2-family. Those are great to have. I live in a 2-story, so I have 3 for the 3 bedrooms that are upstairs. Super duper important. It's just little ladders that you hang over the window ledge, goes out the window, and you're able to climb out of your. If you have fear of heights, you have to get over it real quick. But those are things, some of the things that kind of like fortifying your house for fires, that would be great to have, guys. Also, things like making sure that you have, your carbon monoxide, testers in the right place. And, again, practice these drills, guys. Something that I want to say in regards to practice, you know, in the military and I'm sure in public safety, there's a saying, and that's train like you respond and respond like you train. All that being said, when we do skills on Friday and you guys are doing your medical, we're gonna enjoy, it's gonna be cool, it's gonna be fun, but I want you guys to have that this is for real mindset. Because the way that you train, I promise you, is the way that you respond. That's just how it is. If you kind of like laxing days ago when you're going up and you're kind of goofing off, that's how you're gonna respond, because that's what you do. Okay? Okay, preparing for disaster. Nate mentioned earlier, mitigation is the reduction of loss, life, and property by lessening the impact, okay? Part of the ways that we can start mitigating before disaster even happens is by doing what, guys? What we're doing today, it's coming, I hear it. It's not coming. It's being prepared, right? Can I get an amen, somebody?
Amen.
There we go. Okay. Any activity that prevents an emergency or reduces effects of hazards. Being prepared, okay? Making sure that you have fire extinguishers in place. Making sure that you have carbon monoxide testers in place. Making sure that you know how and where your utilities are, gas, making sure you have the proper tools to turn those off. There's modules in here where you guys will cover that, okay? Certain members should have adequate homeowners coverage. You guys own your homes, don't know. Talk to your folks if they do, and tell them to get some. Add flood insurance if you're in the flood hazard area. Before, what was the floods, Colin?
2017.
13?
17.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
I'm sure that made a difference now here in some areas, guys. So just making sure that you have proper insurance in the area that you're in. You got it right. Oh, here we go. Non-structural hazard mitigation. Heavy furniture, guys, make sure that you can get that stuff anchored. Talk to family and friends about that. You can go to places like Lowe's, Home Depot to get these supplies. If you're in the office, make sure that you secure the appliances and the equipment. Not necessarily here in our area, but in the areas where there are disasters such as hurricanes, make sure that you have storm shutters. Childproof the cabinets and doors, not just for the children, but to prevent the dishes and stuff from falling out. During a possible earthquake, as I said earlier, locate and label gas, electricity, and water shutoffs. Secure, Nick was talking about this earlier, secure the water heaters and have flexible gas lines installed. Any questions on any of that stuff? Good. Some other mitigation measures. This is some serious business, guys. Bolt houses to the foundation. Install trusses or hurricane straps to reinforce roof. Strap propane tanks and chimneys. That's something we kind of use here. especially if you have barbecue grills and propane and stuff like that at your house. If you live in a mobile home park, strap mobile homes to their slab, raise utilities, and if you have the money, build a safe room. I can't afford one, but I can go in the room and call it safe. Fortifying your home. Different non-structural hazards to fortify against home fires, landslides and mudslides. And how can you guys fortify your home against wildfires?
A line around the house.
You got physical space. Nick, what is it, 30 feet now? Is it 30 foot?
Well, there's different mitigations for different distances,
Oh, okay.
and
So, whatever that would be, but make sure that you have good defensible space. So guys, let's get involved here. Preparedness requires active participation from all. As I've kind of mentioned time and time again today, talk to your friends and your family about hazards. The area that you live in, the things in your home. You might have stuff when you guys get to the house. Look around your house and look of what could be possible hazards if there was an earthquake. Okay, guys, and start getting that stuff in order. Ask about emergency planning outside your home. If you're living in one of the flood zones here, see what the escape routes are. See what the planning routes are for the floods. Make sure those in charge have a plan. Make sure that you have a plan. Make sure that your family has a plan. Training provides skills needed to help others and keep skills current. So here's the deal, guys. After you guys finish this program, and I think the Conservation Corp, like, you guys are, I see you guys all over the place. In the trucks driving by, and I was like, man, I wish I could have got in that program when I was younger, right? It's a great program, and you guys really help in the community. And when you're finished with this course, I think it's just gonna add to the value that you guys already have and the value that you guys are already bringing the community. Through my field medic training, being in the military, nursing, I worked in the emergency room at Valley Medical Center, emergency room at Kaiser Santa Teresa. I'm a wilderness first responder, which means that I'm trained to go to the woods and with no what we call manufactured equipment, turn your shirt, your sweater into a sea collar, get you transported out properly, and treat you with non-manufactured materials. And this particular program, to me, is one of the best programs that we can have as civilians. And how many EMTs do we have in here? Okay. How many doctors do I have in here? Nurses? None? Okay, that's what I thought. This program is one of the best programs for just civilian people that we can have, because it really gets people mentally set, and it really brings forth the training and the right training that we need to save lives. We respond to, as it was mentioned earlier, the first responders are overwhelmed because there's so many incidents going on. That's called, when you have bodies, that's called an MCI as well, or a mass casualty incident, which means that there are more victims than emergency responders. And our integration into that system will be assisting in that area, right? Which is the reason why here in CERT, we don't do CPR. The mantra here is to do the greatest good for the greatest amount. Something like that. Guys, get that? We're doing the greatest good for the greatest amount. What do I mean by that? Does anybody know what I mean when I say that? The greatest good for the greatest amount. Okay, I'll tell you what that means. Legally, if I start to do CPR on a person, I cannot stop CPR until I'm properly relieved by professional responders, paramedics, fire. We don't do CPR here. If you're CPR certified, that's great. But if you're responding as a CERT member, you will not do CPR. No mouth-to-mouth, any of that business. And we don't do what we call C-spine, which is when we think there's an injury, a spinal injury. And the reason why we don't do that is because you could be holding that C-spine position and the CPR for a long, long time. You cannot be relieved from doing C-spine until the person is strapped to the board. That takes a lot of time. So now we have a person that we're doing CPR on that might have died anyway, but we have 3 or 4 people over here who we could have saved. One was bleeding, but now they bled out because I was doing CPR. One was having some airway issues, but I didn't get to him in just the airway, so I've lost 2, and the person that I was doing the CPR on died. So we don't do those things that are time consuming. The greatest good for the greatest amount, okay?
I think we need to clarify the context of what Derek is talking about. That's when you have multiple people injured. If you're out doing something else and somebody needs CPR, you gotta do a CPR, right? If you've got one patient. What Derek's talking about is when you got this MCI, mass casualty incident, sometimes you will end up, if you start CPR, you will end up being so tired you can't continue. If you're by yourself and you can't continue, you have to stop. You don't have much choice about that. We're going to talk about triage, which Derek was describing, I think, this afternoon, which is how do you do the greatest good for the greatest number when you have multiple patients. But just want to make sure it's crystal clear that it's okay if you're in some other kind of search situation outside of a disaster. Absolutely do want to do CPR if you're trained to do it.
So when there's an MCI incident, you'd rather focus on the quantity at hand than the quality?
Well, it's gonna always be quality. But here, through the CERT program, because the way that we're integrated, we're not gonna be doing CPR on so like in this class, we don't offer CPR.
Okay.
Right, so if you're CPR to whatever level that you're qualified on, you could be doing that, but I'm not sure what the legality of that is with the CERT vest on or CERT gear on, because we don't do CPR. We don't teach CPR here in CERT. So, Colin, can you be a little clear about that? I'm not.
Let me add one more thing. This is the idea of not doing CPR and a triage. It's called triage, where you got too many patients, not enough responders. That's not just CERT. That's everybody. Firefighters, paramedics, EMS. None of us start doing. There's only one situation when you have more patients than responders where you actually do CPR, and that's lightning. If you have a lightning strike. But these rules are the same. Triage is the same, whether you're CERT, a paramedic, a firefighter, whatever. It's just that, Derek was saying, the principle is we don't want to save one person by trying CPR when we could save 10 others by not doing CPR. That's the greatest good for the greatest number of things.
Thank you, sir.
And I'll chime in just for the heck of it. With CPR, when you're doing CPR in a normal day-to-day emergency environment where there's no disaster, that's okay. But the chances of survival of that person that you're doing CPR on is very low. And even if they get to the hospital and they're resuscitated, it's not great. But in a disaster, that is even lower because the advanced medical personnel, the doctors and nurses at the hospital, will be attending to all sorts of critical injuries caused by the disaster. So they're not going to necessarily focus much attention on, or any attention possibly on that person that you're doing CPR on. And while you're doing CPR with a mass casualty incident where there are other people that need your help that you can get to, you can control excessive bleeding, stop them from bleeding out, open their airway, keep them breathing, that sort of thing. We need to move on from the person who has collapsed and would require CPR normally and focus on saving 10 other people. And that's one of the sad parts of responding to disasters. You can't save everybody.
Yeah, and just, it's a general principle when responding to a disaster. Don't get so focused in on one victim that a bunch of others are being ignored and may die when you can very easily save them. So, and we'll teach you how to do that.
And again, that's kind of like that assessing and search size up. In a disaster, but this is something that I recommend doing daily anyway, is always pay attention to your surroundings, guys. No matter where you are, just pay attention to your surroundings. Part of that search size up is paying attention to your surroundings, looking, using your senses, listening, okay? I might be looking here, but I can hear the roof cracking, right? Use your senses. 1 out of 10, be careful about using those this one. Why is that? Chemicals, gases. What is that for? You need to keep sniffing. No, get away from it, right? Some people might like it. Okay. CERT program provides training, practice, and connection to others. Today, I kind of did that. I'm going to put him on the spot right quick. This young man back here at the table, that's Matt, he's a friend of mine. And Matt is an observer today, but what he does is animal rescue. He's connected with some of the fire departments. He gets called out. Matt is not yet a CERT member, but guess what? A couple of years ago, we found that doing rescues, a lot of people were leaving their animals behind, and they were getting dead because of that. So it became part of the curriculum and emergency response to start removing animals from the dwellings as well. This young man is trained in that, and that's what he does, so that's why I brought him out today, so he can kind of observe the class and just kind of see the structure, and at some point, maybe do some supplemental training for us. And again, this is me trying to connect what we do at CERT through the entire community. Yes, sir.
Yeah, you might want to mention also, in another, as a rescuer, dog rescuer, you might want to also prepare for animal rescue, for animal emergencies too. You know, not just like for instance, for me, since I have a 4-legged child, I want to be prepared. I want to make sure that my dog is prepared for, in case of an emergency, you know, have all the veterinarians contacts, you know, and make sure that if I can't get to my dog, then who can, like, you know, get to my dog or something like that, or if I have to place him somewhere else, I want to make sure that that person can take care of him while I'm, you know, unable to, you know. So that's another thing you have to, and also plan at least 3 months and 3 months worth of food and stuff like that, water and stuff like that in case. Also.
So what Matt is saying, again, with your pets and your animals at home, integrate them into your plan as well. The same things that you need, your pets need, okay? Participate in drills and exercises. Pre-COVID, we were doing a lot of training through CERT. We did a few trainings out at Moffitt, a few different places, huh, Colin?
Yep.
Morgan Hill, Gilroy. So, you know, we're constantly participating in drills and practicing. And guys, talk to your friends and families about volunteering. I think volunteering is super duper important. From my experience, most of the people that volunteer for anything that they're volunteering for, they have a passion for it and for working with people. And a lot of times that's what we need in order to stay connected and with the community. Okay? Third disaster response. So we respond in a period immediately after a disaster, okay? Which means after, where it be calling in what we call damage reports, whether it be stuff like calling in the damage reports, evaluating our neighborhood, checking on our neighbors. We assist with emergency personnel when requested. If you got a scanner on and you got your vest and your green hat and you hear it, you go show up at a scene, no good. You cannot do that. Only when requested. The vest and the hat does not mean that you go out because you heard it. No, we only respond and we only assist these guys when requested. If they don't ask, we don't ask them, okay? Your first responsibility is to you and your family. Before we can go out and help the neighbor, before you can go out and assist the city, you have to make sure that your home is safe. You have to make sure that you are safe. So the very first responsibility is to yourself and your family, okay? You can respond after disaster. Again, what I was saying earlier, locate where the utilities are, learn how to turn those off safely. We'll be talking later on in the module when you guys go into the fire suppression, how to extinguish small fires, which is, like Nick was saying, it's a small fire about the size of a small garbage can, okay? Enough to maybe put a top over it and put it out type business. But we'll go into that. Treat injuries, we'll go into that later today in modules 1 and 2, different types of injuries. Conduct light search and rescue. I think you guys will be doing that on Thursday. And then help to relieve survivor stress. You guys will learn about that through disaster psychology, disaster psychology. Conducting light search and rescue. Because we're doing medical today, I will connect the area of your triaging with the light search and rescue. You will do the search and rescue module actually on Thursday, but I'm gonna bridge that gap. Maybe not for you guys, but maybe because of my brain. It took me a long time for some reason to put those two together. Because you'll see that there's a medical disasters part 1 and part 2. And it's a 1 and 2 because they take place at different times, okay? So I'll bridge that gap with you guys later today. Okay, you wanna do this?
Sure. This is the world I live in.
Yep.
Most of the summer anyway. So we talked about roles and responsibilities and staying in your lane and that sort of thing. This is called the Incident Command System, or ICS, and everybody in the United States operates under this system. And the great thing about it is I can go to Florida or Pennsylvania or anywhere in the country and I know how I fit into the system. There is one thing a little different. On a small local incident, medical often is under operations, but these bigger incidents, medical actually goes over here under logistics most of the time, or sometimes slots in as its own separate section. Our medical units are getting so big because and actually we own search and rescue. Well, we own rescue, sometimes we own search. So for instance, on this last fire where I was, I think we had about 55 people in the medical unit. So that's getting to a size where it really kind of needs to be its own section. But the idea here is that, well, one of the things I'll say is if you get a chance to work wildland fire here in California, it makes it so much easier to understand this. Learning this all theoretically in a classroom or reading a book, it's kind of hard for it to really sink in. But when I have to go to finance which is part of this, to get paid, I really learn, you know, what do these guys do? Or if I need to order line medics, I know that ordering, which is part of logistics, is where I send a message. Please order me one of these. I know that, I mentioned before, on wildland fires, every day we get a new plan. In fact, I may have one in my car, this thing called the Incident Action Plan, but basically says, it's all the information everybody needs, and every unit on the fire is supposed to have one of those with them every day. Starts off with like, who's running things, what are the goals, what's the weather today gonna be, what's the fire behavior gonna look like, and there's a whole bunch of sheets where the fire is divided into different divisions, and the names of every either person or unit, and the unit might have, if it's a crew, like a California Conservation Corp crew, those 20 people will be listed as a crew instead of their individual names. So a bunch of sheets saying who's assigned where, and then there'll be the medical plan in the back. Sometimes there's a message from our human relations people. There's often a safety message, and every day there's a new safety reminder because safety is so important. But as I said, this gets redone every day. So every day, under this planning section, there's people who are writing that plan. There's people who are making maps of the incident. That's called the situation unit. And those maps get updated every day. And one of the really cool things about our mobile devices, which some of us did not grow up with these, is we have maps that are made for the incident that are updated every day. And as you move around, it shows you exactly where you are. So we no longer have to rely, we're supposed to still know how to use a paper map and a compass to find our way around, but the reality is we're getting pretty rusty at that because we're completely spoiled by phones and tablets with our maps, and the planning section builds those maps. There's maps for everybody on the ground, there's maps for the planes, there's maps for the community as well that shows, you know, where the fire boundaries are, where the evacuation warnings and everything are. But this structure, which really came out of wildfires in Southern California a number of years ago, and also the Oakland Hills firestorm, which was 89, 88, 89, I don't know. Big fire up around Berkeley and south. Standardized, the need, we saw the need to standardize how we do a lot of this stuff. So it makes it very predictable. If you go to a wildland fire, you will see tents, usually tents or trailers, that say, you know, logistics, planning, operations. You don't go in there unless you really need to, because those are the people with the gold. So try to grasp this as much as you can. We're not going to talk about it in much detail, but if you join Aries Races, the ham radio emergency responders, if you do any of the CERT teams require ICS like 200, 300?
Yes, they
basic
will.
ICS classes?
They will require ICS 100 or 200 and 700. And then as you go up in rank, if you will, on the CERT, they'll go to 800 and then possibly 300 and 400.
So what we're talking about are classes that you can, for the most part, take online that will teach you this system. But it also helps tremendously to actually work within the system to learn it well. And so you can actually, we'll provide that, but you can search, it's through FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Association. Their online training, you can learn much more about this. And then when you get up to what's called ICS 300 and 400, which is for managing really complex incidents, those you have to, at least before COVID, have to do those in person. And then get into really complicated scenarios with multiple things going on and so forth. But people come from other countries to the United States to learn how to do this because it works so well. And it was invented right here in California. So, not sure what you guys are going to be issued. Probably for just your regular work. We've got at least some of these PPEs. Before COVID, we used to have to tell people that PPE stands for personal protective equipment. Well, one of the blessings of COVID, it's very small, is everybody knows what that means now. So helmet, goggles. So something you're going to hear us say again and again, and hopefully we will not forget to say it often, it'll be in the slides, is your safety is number one. Your safety is number one. Because what happens if you get hurt during a disaster? Well, we've lost you, and that's one less disaster responder that we have, and we've lost the people who are going to take care of you. So that might be 2 or 3, or heaven forbid, if it's a rescue or something, even more. So we really just, not just to be kind and nice, and not just because we don't want you to get hurt, we just don't want to lose, a disaster is defined by the fact that we don't have enough resources to respond to it. If you get hurt, that's one, not just you that's out of the game, but several other people taking care of you. So safety is number one. There's some standard firefighting orders that every firefighter learns, and it's just a bunch of things that have to do with safety, and it ends with fight fire aggressively, first having provided for firefighter safety. And so it's all the safety stuff, and all those come before, then we get to fight the fire with safety. Yes.
Do you know all your 1019?
I probably could recite them if I stood here and thought really hard about it. So you've done some law things? Yeah, they make us memorize, it's called the 10s and the 18s. I was talking about the 5 stands for, which I think I did recite. Nobody has made me recite them in a while. I'm not going to. All right, so.
Well, they can say that.
So one guy who knows the deal on a lot of this stuff already. So N95 mask, that's these have been shown to work very well at stopping, mostly stopping, not completely, but these do a great job at reducing the spread of COVID. But if you really want to be even more effective, especially if you've got somebody who you know has COVID or they have COVID symptoms or dusty areas and so forth, the N95 masks are better, and those fit more tightly on your face. And technically, you're really supposed to once a year get tested to make sure that seals well, and then use that type. All firefighters, medical people, and so forth have to go through that fit testing once a year for any mask we're going to use, whether it's the air tanks, and it's air, not oxygen. If you want to sound like you know what you're talking about fire, call those things air packs, not oxygen packs. You have to get fit tested for that. You have to get fit tested for the N95s, and you have to get fit tested for half-face respirators, which are those big things that make you look like Spider-Man. So gloves. Leather gloves are great for doing any kind of heavy rescue equipment. You will always find latex, or actually non-latex, nitrile gloves in my pocket, because I never know when something medical is going to happen. I need to pull those on. And then sturdy shoes or work boots. Very, very important. It's pretty easy to hurt your feet or twist your ankle or something. So fairly high boots that are strong are essential. And a whistle. I don't always keep my whistle with me, but I usually do. So, start in action. So this is fire extinguisher training. I think here they may be using real fire extinguishers. What we have are water fire extinguishers that put out sort of a real fire. And we get a chance to practice with those. Practice with the fire extinguishers. This is light rescue. And so we're talking about this. They're raising this concrete block. Often it's dummy, that's not real. They're using these blocks to hold that in place. Anybody want to guess what the #1 safety rule would be when you're raising up something heavy like this off of somebody, whether it's a block of concrete or a car or whatever? What do you think would be the most important safety rule?
Lift with your legs, not your back.
Lift with your legs, not your back. Not the most important, very important. You're probably not going to lift this directly. You're probably going to use a lever and a fulcrum to lift it.
Make sure you don't drop it on someone.
Don't drop it on somebody. Well, yeah. What was that #1 most important rule about safety that I mentioned a little while ago that I said we're going to say again and again?
Your safety.
Your safety is #1. So with that in mind, in terms of your safety, what do you think is the most important rule when you're raising a heavy object?
Educate.
Don't put any part of your body under that object. Very simple, right? So you're raising a car on somebody, you don't reach in there. So you'll see, these are wooden blocks that we call cribbing. We put that cribbing under there, and then once it's lowered onto there and it's stable and it's safe, then you can reach it, right? But that is probably the most important rule when you're doing that light rescue stuff. And wearing PPE always. This guy is probably doing called a point of distribution. So in a disaster, we need to get food and water and so forth to people. And so organizing how we hand that out, especially when people are kind of desperate. When I was in Haiti during the earthquake, we were not able to do food and water and so forth. So we actually never drank water or ate food in front of the Haitian people because we didn't have anything to give away. But even organizing the medical care so that you know, people weren't being real aggressive, but they were pretty desperate for care. And so figuring out how to organize people so that they would stay in an orderly line and we could take care of them in the order, not just they showed up, but who needed care the most, wasn't a huge challenge, but what we found was real simple. We took a tablet and put numbers on pieces of paper, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we had the policemen who were with us hand those cards out to people. That way the people at the end of the line had an idea that they would get taken care of. We actually always had people waiting. It was a disaster, it was overwhelming. But that helped keep things organized. I spent 2 months doing COVID vaccines up at the Oakland Coliseum, and we were doing up to like 7,000 a day. And just organizing the traffic coming through was huge. We had the National Guard doing that, building these big serpentines and lanes, and you know, just to keep everything flowing through 7,000 a day. Quite an accomplishment. So this looks like a simple thing, handing out water, but when you're doing it on a large scale, and that's the kind of thing that you guys very, very likely are going to help out with. Just keeping that running smoothly. Other things certain teams have done is like answering phones. And so you'll be given information for the public about, you know, about just all sorts of information about the disaster. And when they call, if you're able to answer that question, you give them that information, or know where to send that phone call to someone who can answer. So certain teams do all sorts of things. It's good to be flexible. Good information. Everything you do. So outside of disaster, so one thing to understand about CERT is every city does it somewhat differently. Some cities really organize everybody and have CERT very active, even when there's not a disaster happening. Other cities kind of train people and release them and will use them if and when a disaster hits. I think we're seeing CERT being used more and more outside of disaster. So non-disaster things, so just knowing who in your neighborhood can't take care of themselves, that's huge. The elderly people, the people with disabilities, we call that access and functional needs. So that if they're deaf or they can't walk or they're blind, those are the people who suffer or they don't speak English. We have a ton of those people. That doesn't sound good. We have a lot of people in Silicon Valley who English is not their first language. They might not speak it at all or very little. And those are the people who get hit the hardest in a disaster. So when there isn't a disaster coming, remember I said network communities are resilient communities? Just knowing who they are and where they live is a huge help, because then you know whose door you should go knock on and check, see what they need. Or, you know, who speaks English and Vietnamese? Who can go talk to that person who only speaks Vietnamese? Security and preparedness materials and demos. So we're going to teach you how to be personally prepared, because if you're not personally prepared, you're no help to anybody else. And then you can teach that. We're going to teach you basic first aid. So sometimes, I don't know if, you know, it's all, everything's kind of up in the air, partly because of COVID, partly because we're having more and more disasters in the United States. So we're training more and more people and expanding the roles that people can fulfill. And it'll change from time to time, different leadership and so forth. So maybe staffing first aid moves in events, assisting with installation of smoke alarms. I'm not sure if it's CERT that's done that here, but we have it. The Red Cross has had some drives to get smoke alarms installed, especially in the manufactured home parks and so forth. Parade route management. I know that our ham radio folks in Los Altos are involved in that, in like the pet parade. I think CERT is too. You guys remember?
Los Altos?
I think in the Los Altos Pet Parade in particular, I think they get CERT involved in helping to run that. So a lot of different possibilities.
I know the Festival of Lights around Christmas we did.
Too, yeah.
That's what I did, yeah.
So I think cities are starting to use CERT more and more for all sorts of different things.
Garlic Festival, when it was here.
Yeah, Garlic Festival. Okay, so let's talk about liability and so forth. When you're a volunteer, there's something called the Good Samaritan Law that basically protects you from anybody winning a lawsuit against you unless you intentionally hurt them. So you can't get away with that, right? But short of that, you have pretty much blanket protection against somebody winning a lawsuit against you. They might, some people are just that way, and they might file a lawsuit, but it's going to get thrown out because of this thing called the Good Samaritan Law. It doesn't apply to those of us who do it professionally, unfortunately. But basically, when you are a volunteer and you're trying to help, and you don't intentionally harm somebody, you are completely protected against somebody winning a lawsuit. And so every state in the country has those. And then, actually not sure.
I want that phone, man. And that.
So one of the things you really don't have to worry much about is getting in trouble legally, as long as you're just trying to help. One thing you absolutely shouldn't do is go beyond your own training. So stick to what you are trained to do.
How many milliamps is this?
So
The bottom one's like 45 watts.
I am back to
And
being
that's
basically
probably
a
like 25, I think.
So even though I know how to do some of that
Yeah.
advanced stuff, I have to.
Yeah, I got one that's like 50,000 and another one that's 80,000. But I didn't,
So
those are too
stick to the
bulky.
things that we teach you in the class. Don't go above and beyond.
I got one also that's like
Any
solar
questions?
power, you can charge it that way.
The Volunteer Protection Act, it says, states that this act preempts inconsistent state law except when such law provides additional protection from liability relating to volunteers and the performance of services for a nonprofit organization or government entity. Makes this act inapplicable to any civil action in the state court against a volunteer in which all parties are citizens of the state if such state enacts a statute declaring its election that this act cannot apply. I didn't understand any of that.
Oh, it's pretty simple. So she looked up this Volunteer Protection Act.
Okay.
Basically, it says that no matter what the state laws are, this protects you, and the state laws can add some extra protection, right? So you're highly, highly protected against people doing that. So, Santa Clara County, all the cities that have certain programs get together regularly to talk about training. COVID has, of course, put a damper on some of that, but we frequently offer, in the county, we'll offer additional training. So there's things like advanced first aid, animal issues. So in addition to what you heard about animal rescue, we also now have a large animal rescue team here in the county. I'm part of that through, Spring Valley Fire is the host of that. And that's primarily about horses, but large dogs as well. And people usually don't really want to rescue cattle because they aren't really as valuable. They're not pets like horses are. But we have that now. AED and CPR, those go together. That's just good training to have no matter what. Because early intervention, when somebody's heart stops beating properly, makes all the difference. So I as a volunteer, actually, I do medical at Levi's Stadium for the 49er games. And a couple of years ago, we had a guy go into cardiac arrest in the stands toward the beginning of the game. Bystanders, people right there started CPR immediately. Now, and we have, it's called RockMed. Rock Medicine is our group, plus we have Santa Clara Fire Department there. So AED was there real fast, paramedics were there real fast. 45 minutes later, we hear he's awake and talking in the emergency room. And honestly, that's rare. It is rare for people to survive cardiac arrest. But when there is somebody right there, and it could be you, who can start doing CPR, who knows how to use an AED, the chances of survival go up tremendously. So that's another one that is add-on training to this. Community relations, so building that strong network community. Debris removal, cleanup. There's another volunteer organization called Team Rubicon, which is mostly military and first responders, and they're starting to do a lot of this alongside CERT and so forth. And there's a lot of need for that in the aftermath of a disaster. So the reason I mentioned Team Rubicon, we just had them up on the Antelope Fire, and they were rolling hose and doing some debris removal and pulling structure wrap, which protects buildings, off of buildings that were threatened by the fire. There's training for donations management. So spread the word. In the aftermath of a disaster, we do not want people to donate furniture and hunter clothing and so forth. Partly for a very simple reason that I didn't even quite recognize for a while. If somebody loses their home in a disaster, they're either staying with friends or they're in a motel room. They have nowhere to put all that crap, excuse me, all that crap that people donate. And it winds up piling up, right? In Lake County, and I know this has happened since then, but a few years ago we had big fires up in Lake County, which is north of us. And they were just, Lake County does not have a lot of money, and all this furniture and clothing stuff was just piled up outside. That fire, the fires happened in September, October. Well, the rains came in November. Now you got giant mountains of wet clothing that's getting moldy and stinky, and the county had to pay enormous amounts of money to just bring in excavators, load it up in trucks, and take it to a dump. So we don't really want people to donate stuff because survivors have nowhere to put it. They just can't use it. So spread the word about that. The only exceptions are the things that people are specifically asking for. So if people do want to donate things other than cash, because cash is what really goes a long way. Cash is what people really need. But sometimes they do need things like diapers and so forth, and if that need is there, word will get out, and that's what some of the organizations like Padre, our Association of Volunteer Agencies, you try to identify those things and get the word out if there are very specific things. But try to spread the word that people please donate stuff that is shelter management. So around here, the lead agency for operating shelters is Red Cross, and they have a number of volunteers, but they may need additional volunteers to do all sorts of things around the shelters. Special needs concerns. So I talked about, we call it access and functional needs. That's people in wheelchairs, people who don't speak English, people who may be blind or deaf, or all those access and functional needs. Those are the people get hit hardest by disasters, as I mentioned. So that would be a big area where certainly we'll need some training around that. Which also closely related to that is cultural awareness. Because we're dealing with people from different cultures, different faiths, and so forth. And sometimes just the rules of society are a little different. Now, almost every religion and culture has exceptions for emergencies. But, in some cultures, it's not okay for a man to touch a woman that he's not related to. Something like that. And it can be overwhelming. I try to study this stuff now and then, and it's a little overwhelming sometimes. But just sort of becoming sensitive to it and aware of what is the right thing to do so that people feel safe and comfortable receiving your fires, bro. There's a lot of things to go with that.
If I do, I ain't gonna need that gear.
Yeah, but that's
So I
where
mentioned we had the National Guard
national
up at
defense or
Upland
something, you
Coliseum,
never know.
guide all the traffic
I
through.
can use their gear.
And,
They already got
there's
it.
an art
Yeah.
to it.
Man, I got some of that stuff,
Really, how
bro.
do you make sure
I can't
drivers have
afford
their
it.
attention?
Damn,
How
I
do you make
lost
sure
my
you're
thing,
safe?
man.
How do you set up
It's not over
cones
there.
and signs and so forth?
It was on
So
here.
that
Yeah, I
people
know, yeah.
will,
Did you see it? I can't
drive.
remember.
Yeah, I saw it, yeah. It sounded like we were running into the car or something like that.
So it's in the
Very
back.
stressed,
You can
not
contact
thinking
the
clearly,
driver,
they're-
see if he's still in there.
they're sometimes really, and we need to bend over backwards to make sure we have their attention and we're communicating in a very effective, unambiguous way about where to walk, where to drive, and so forth. Utilities control. So every year at my fire department, we have PG&E come out and they teach us about how to shut off electricity, how to shut off gas, and we're going to cover those things in the fire section. But there's a lot to know. And there's a lot to be aware of. And there are lots and lots and lots of online classes now that we have. I didn't grow up with the internet. I'm pretty sure you all did. So online courses are kind of, not something I had when I was your age, but they're great, and I teach them, and there's all sorts of things you've done. So, I think we're doing this about right. We were debating what to do if we finished early, but we're not gonna be very early at all. So think about questions, because we'll have a little bit of time for questions. So you should now be able to identify roles and responsibilities. So there's that stay in your lane thing that we're gonna help you understand sort of what is your lane, what is your role. And when everybody stays in their roles and collaborates with each other, things run incredibly smoothly. And we don't have a disaster within the disaster, which certainly can happen when you're not well prepared and people aren't well trained. We talked about the kinds of hazards that we're likely to encounter here in Silicon Valley. They can affect the community, people, health, infrastructure. Personal preparedness. I'll emphasize again that you need to be personally prepared. And we do this with all of our cops, firefighters, medics, dispatchers, everybody, partly not just for themselves, but for their family. I don't know if you guys have family at home or not, but if you do, it's pretty hard for you to be effective responding to a disaster if you're worried about the folks back home. If it's your parents or spouse or kids or whatever, you need to know that they're okay before you're gonna help strangers. That's just kind of common sense, and it's how our brains are wired. Somebody, I think Derek mentioned something about people becoming more selfish during a disaster. That's what our brains do, and that's a good thing, right? We need to take care of ourselves and the people who matter to us the most. Our priorities do shift that way. It's the right thing to do, but it means we really need to know that we're okay and the people we care the most about are okay, so that we're then free to help all those strangers out there who need help. So, personal organizational preparedness. And you should be able to describe sort of how CERT fits into this bigger picture. At least have a bit of an idea of it. There's no homework, because we're going to be doing a little bit more in just a few minutes. So, Derek, you want to come back up and think of questions? Any questions, comments, concerns, criticism? We're talking too soft, we're talking too loud.
One of the things that we need to keep in mind, Derek and Nick love gadgets, and I like gadgets too, but not as much as these guys. So while they're at the table there, they're shopping for more gadgets, but really we need to keep it simple for ourselves. And when we talk about preparedness, what we're saying is use what you already have. In a disaster, you'll just need more of it. So store at least 3 days worth of food and water. At least that much, and store what you need for your pets if you have pets, or for your family. So just keep it really simple. And about rushing in, don't, when you watch Hollywood and the movies and The Rock, saving San Francisco and helicopter, it doesn't really happen like that in real life. We don't rush into dangerous situations, we have to stop and think. And one of the things we like to tell people is don't just do something. Stand there. Don't do something, stand there. So we're looking at the situation, we're evaluating what's going on, we're checking out to make sure that our safety is okay before we even think about going in and doing something. So it's always about your safety. And in that regard, we never want to bring another victim, us, to the disaster. So that's why our safety is number one, our teammates' safety is number two, and the survivor safety is number three. If we get injured, then another rescuer has to take care of us. So, anybody know another name for a medical exam glove? You guys know this one?
What was that?
Another name for a medical exam glove?
A medical exam glove?
Yeah, you guys know? It's called a body substance isolation device.
BSI.
BSI, right. Body substance isolation device. The reason we use the medical exam gloves, and you'll learn more about this in the medical, is because we want to keep ourselves safe. And one of the things that we might be dealing with after a disaster, people will have blood or other bodily fluids on them. And quite literally, 25% of the adult population has a bloodborne pathogen that you could get, possibly, if you're not wearing those gloves. So that's why we wear the gloves.
Well, it's not just gloves. It's gloves, goggles, mask.
Right.
And You wouldn't have that, but out in the car, I've got full isolation suits, to put on if I'm around somebody who's very.
That's right, and so the professionals will have more equipment for dealing with more dangerous situations that they're involved with. Nick, Derek mentioned the FEMA courses that you can take. So if you Google FEMA, FEMA space IS, FEMA IS, they'll take you to the page where they have independent study courses you can take for free. And there are dozens and dozens and dozens of courses. Some courses are an hour long, and some courses are a couple of days long. And then you can take live training through FEMA as well over the internet, so you'll have an instructor, and they'll give you a certificate of completion, so you have something to frame on your wall if you like. And if you don't like Google, you can use Bing. You know what Bing stands for?
I didn't know it stood for anything.
Sorry?
She said she didn't know it stood for anything.
Okay.
I stayed on pronouns.
Bing stands for because it's not Google.
Wow.
And with that said, you guys have anything?
There's also DuckDuckGo.
DuckDuckGo, yes, and Dogpile. Anybody have any questions about disaster preparedness or service in general?
I just wanna share something.
Yes.
Before I used to store all my daughter's, toys behind the main door,
Uh-huh.
and they sent us a paper that it's not okay to have them behind the door, because in case of a emergency airplane or something, you won't have too much space to open the door. So now I remove all my daughter's toys from behind the door and place them somewhere else.
Oh, that's very good. So you're making sure that your exits are
Yeah.
clear in case of an earthquake. When the earthquake happens, it'll be
Or a
shaking.
fire.
Or a fire, yeah. Exactly. The earthquakes will shake everything around. So your bed, your tables, chairs, everything. And if you're working in an office, you know, those big photocopiers and printing machines that they have, they weigh a couple of 100 pounds. They should be bolted to the wall, but sometimes they're not. When the earthquake happens, those things will be going back and forth in the room. Very, very dangerous situation that could happen. So doing the right thing by making sure that they're out in case of an earthquake or a fire.
Yeah.
So if you were to look under my bed, you would see a crowbar. The reason that crowbar is there is because it is safer to sleep with your bedroom door closed. Anybody want to guess why? What happens in a fire?
With your room door being closed, you're basically in a safe zone because all the smoke isn't
Exactly.
going to your room.
So fires tend to start outside the bedroom. And that smoke, you could pass out without ever waking up from breathing the smoke, and you're gonna die, right? Well, we all have smoke detectors now, hopefully. So with your door closed, you don't get the smoke, the detector starts going off, you wake up. So that's survival. So it's much safer to sleep with the door closed. But when the earthquake hits, everything shifts, and that door can be jammed shut. That's why there's a crowbar under my bed. And I suggest everybody do the same thing. That way I can pry that door open and get out.
You guys know that in most of the times in fires, that the victims die from smoke inhalation as opposed to being burned. So, excellent information that's there.
Anybody else have anything to share? Any ideas for preparedness for yourself? Okay, well, we're going to take a half-hour break for lunch. Would that work for everybody? And we'll be back here about around 10 to 12. Okay. 35 to 12.